Welcome to This Explainer. Okay, we're actually just going to skip the usual preamble today because we have a truly fascinating and honestly chilling 125-year-old unsolved mystery to unpack together. We're traveling to the rugged, wind-battered coast of Scotland to look at a case that has literally baffled investigators for over a century. It's a story where the sheer, terrifying power of nature meets human vulnerability, leaving behind questions we're still trying to answer today.
3 men vanished. No struggle, no bodies, absolutely no trace. In December 1900, on a tiny, incredibly isolated rock in the Atlantic Ocean called Island Moor, 3 lighthouse keepers completely disappeared into thin air. For centuries, local shepherds actually refused to even spend a single night on this island, claiming something else lived there, something deeply unsettling. But as we're going to see, the concrete facts of what actually happened to these 3 men, they're far stranger and honestly far more terrifying than any local folklore.
The chilling discovery, December 26, 1900. So, a relief ship named the Hesperus finally reached the island after severe weather and just monstrous waves kept them trapped in port for days. When Captain Jim Harvey brought his ship alongside the landing, the atmosphere was, it was immediately wrong. There was no flag flying from the flagpole to signal their arrival. The usual empty supply boxes, they weren't waiting on the landing stage to be refilled, and most unsettling of all, nobody came out to greet them. Harvey sounded the ship's horn, letting this huge, loud blast echo against the rocks. He even fired a signal rocket into the sky, and absolutely nothing. Just an eerie, heavy silence coming from the rock.
Relief keeper Joseph Moore climbed into a small boat, all alone, and rowed ashore to investigate. Now let's run through exactly what he found. The outer gate, it stood wide open. The main door was shut tight, but it was completely unlocked. In dead silence, Moore slowly climbed the 160 steps up into the lighthouse. And guys, what he found inside is still chilling more than a century later. The beds hadn't been slept in. The kitchen clock had completely stopped. There was just one knocked-over chair resting on the floor. And the only living thing left in the entire lighthouse was a single canary just sitting quietly in its cage. James Ducat, Thomas Marshall, and Donald MacArthur were gone forever.
Engineering the unforgiving rock, a Victorian marvel. Okay, so to understand how impossible this disappearance seemed, we have to flash back briefly a year prior. The Flannan Isles Lighthouse was an absolute masterpiece of Victorian engineering. Designed by David Allen Stevenson and completed in 1899, it sat 20 miles offshore, right in the middle of the crashing, volatile, completely unforgiving Atlantic Ocean. This wasn't just a building, it was literally a fortress designed to withstand the end of the world.
Let's talk about the cost, £215,000. To put that into perspective, that's the massive modern equivalent of what it actually cost to build back in 1899. This kind of investment highlights just how vital and serious this operation was to the government. They weren't just throwing up some wooden shack on a beach, right? They were conquering a hostile, dangerous environment to protect passing ships and save lives. The investment was monumental because the danger to sailors out there was absolute.
And the sheer physical challenge of the location, it's staggering. We're talking about a 148-foot sheer cliff face. The hardest part actually wasn't building the 75-foot tower itself. It was the fact that every single heavy stone, every piece of machinery, every pane of glass, it all had to be dragged up a 148-foot sheer cliff. There was no natural landing route, no gentle slope to just walk up. The engineers literally had to build a custom cable-hauled railway just to move supplies up this unforgiving, vertical slope. It was a total triumph of human will over raw nature.
So when the massive light was switched on for the very first time on December 7, 1899, 3 men were stationed there permanently. We have James Ducat, the principal keeper, Thomas Marshall, his assistant, and Donald MacArthur, who was actually just filling in for a sick colleague named William Ross. Their entire job existed to make sure that light never went out. It was the literal difference between a safe passage and a catastrophic shipwreck for every single vessel in the area. A supply ship arrived every 2 weeks, and everything was designed to run like absolute clockwork.
A timeline of silence, tracking the delay. So, how could 3 men just vanish without anyone noticing right away? Well, when you're that isolated, time kind of moves differently. A breakdown in communication can be fatal before anyone on the mainland even realizes something is wrong.
Let's move to the timeline and see how this all builds up. On December 13th, we have the last full logbook entry. On the morning of December 15th, weather readings were casually jotted on a slate, ready to be officially copied later. So this tells us they were doing their jobs completely normally up until that afternoon. But that night, the transatlantic steamer Arctur, sailing from Philadelphia, noticed the impossible. The lighthouse was entirely dark. Because of their route, they couldn't actually report it until they docked in Leith 3 whole days later on the 18th. The board immediately dispatched the relief ship Hesperus, but brutal, violent weather trapped it in port until December 20th. It wasn't until December 26th, 11 full days after the light first went dark, that help finally reach the island. Think about that. 11 days of total isolation.
Clues and the official verdict, investigating the scene. Investigators obviously needed to thoroughly examine the location. Enter Robert Muirhead, the Northern Lighthouse Board superintendent. He personally sailed out to the island to conduct a meticulous, official investigation of the grounds to find out what on earth happened to his men.
What he found was basically a tale of two wildly different scenes. Let's look at the interior versus the massive destruction outside. Inside, it was absolutely pristine. Everything was perfectly in order. The lamp was clean, the oil was completely topped up, and the heavy machinery was in perfect working condition. But out at the West Landing where the supply boats unloaded, Muirhead found incredible, massive destruction. Thick iron railings were bent and violently torn entirely from their concrete bases. A heavy storage box, sitting a full 108 feet above sea level, was completely smashed open, its contents just scattered to the wind. Even a boulder weighing over a ton had been forcefully shifted. This sheer devastation really illustrates the terrifying, raw power of the storm that had struck the island.
But then, investigators noticed a detail that kind of changes everything. Why was one raincoat left behind? Inside the perfectly ordered lighthouse, they found a spare set of oilskins. It belonged to Donald MacArthur. This meant that whatever happened outside, MacArthur had rushed out into the brutal, freezing, violent weather completely unprotected. It's a detail that really speaks to a moment of sudden, overwhelming panic.
This specific clue led to Muirhead's official conclusion, the rogue wave theory. The official verdict was accidental death, most likely drowning. The theory basically proposes that Marshall and Ducat went out after the storm to secure equipment at the West Landing, and a massive, sudden wave swept them both into the sea. MacArthur, rushing out without his raincoat to help his friends, was tragically taken by a second massive wave. It's a very real, ever-present danger in those notoriously violent waters, and a sobering reminder of human vulnerability in the face of nature.
Fact, fiction, and folklore. Debunking the myths. Now that simple, tragic, official verdict of accidental drowning, it completely failed to satisfy a public who was hungry for drama, intrigue, and a good mystery. People wanted a story that matched the eerie emptiness of that lighthouse.
It's deeply fascinating and honestly a bit unsettling how easily misinformation spreads when we desperately want a story. Let's compare the tabloid inventions to the official facts. Newspapers in the early 1900s basically invented these incredible dramatic details. You might have heard the famous rumor about an untouched meal left frozen mid-bite on the table, or these highly emotional, weeping logbook entries describing the men praying together through a horrific storm. Let's strictly separate that from reality. The official facts? No untouched meal was ever reported by the investigators. And those logbook entries? Completely normal. The dramatic story of men crying and praying was pure tabloid invention, designed purely to sell papers through sensationalism. It's a timeless reminder to always question the source of a compelling narrative.
You know, because no bodies were ever recovered and there were literally 0 witnesses, people proposed just about every alternate explanation imaginable. Let's walk through these. First, the fight theory. Some researchers noted Donald MacArthur had a reputation for a short temper, suggesting a physical altercation broke out near the cliff edge and all 3 men went over together. Second, supernatural rumors. The locals had always claimed the island was haunted. We're talking sea serpents, fairies, and a legendary phantom vessel known as the Phantom of the Seven Hunters just sweeping them away. And of course, jumping to more recent decades, we have modern theories of extraterrestrial interference. Yep, alien abduction. Obviously, none of these have ever been definitively proven, but they show how our minds rush to fill a void of information.
These fabricated details and theories actually left a massive cultural legacy. In 1912, the poet Wilfred Wilson Gibson published a popular ballad called Flannan Isles, and he vividly described that fake untouched meal and the overturned chair. It was incredibly popular and, totally by accident, it cemented those tabloid inventions into public consciousness as historical fact. From there, the fascination only grew. In 1968, the rock band Genesis even wrote a song about the mystery. In 1971, the lighthouse was fully automated, meaning no keepers have lived there since. And in 2018, the whole thing actually inspired the feature film, The Vanishing.
Take a second to really digest the sheer scope of time that has passed here. 125 years, 2 world wars, a moon landing, the birth of the internet. Human progress has reshaped our reality in almost every conceivable way since then. Yet, the mystery of that small lighthouse on Island Moor remains exactly as dark and unsolved today as it was on December 26, 1900.
We know 3 men went to an unforgiving rock in the Atlantic to keep sailors safe. We know a massive, destructive storm hit. And we know that someone rushed out without a coat. But beyond that, with just an overturned chair and a stopped clock left behind, what truly happened on Island Moor? The ocean is still holding on to plenty of secrets, just waiting to be uncovered. Keep questioning the evidence, keep learning, and thank you so much for joining me for this explainer.